Today we are going to be talking about test equipment, and we're going to be taking a look at this, the Micsig STO1104E Smart Portable Oscilloscope. Now in this video I'm going to give you guys an overview of what this oscilloscope is, some of its features, and at the end of the video I'm going to give you my thoughts on this device. Now these range of oscilloscopes from Micsig are quite unusual compared to other models on the market. Not only are they portable and designed to be used on the bench and out in the field, they're also smart devices as well, and they bring a whole new range of capabilities we're not used to seeing on traditional bench type scopes. This scope is based on Android, and it features an 8-inch LCD touchscreen with a resolution of 800 x 600. It runs Android 7 and has 8 GB of internal storage, has Wi-Fi, LAN, HDMI and USB connectivity. Taking a closer look at the scope element of this device itself, the STO1104E features 100 MHz bandwidth, 1 gig sample rate, 70 meg memory depth, up to 130,000 waveforms a second capture rate, and it has various trigger functions including edge, pulse, logic, video, and supports multiple decode options including UART, CAN, SPI, I2C among others. Looking at its dimensions, it's 280 by 180 by 50 mm and weighs just over 1.7 kilos with the battery included. The main controls for the scope are located on the right hand side of the screen, and here you will find everything you would expect to see on a normal scope. This includes your vertical, your horizontal and your trigger controls, your adjustments for your measurement functions, your start, stop and run functions, as well as the home button, a shift button for multifunction keys and a soft power button as well. All of the buttons are the soft silicon type, and the control knobs also have a coating on the outside, making them easy to grip when in use. Moving around the rest of the device, on the top you'll find the main channel inputs. These are all 1 meg 300 volt Cat 1 rated. You'll also find an aux output here too. Looking down the side, you'll find most of the connectivity options, including your 12 volt DC input, micro USB, USB-A for connecting to external storage, HDMI display output, the 1 kHz oscillator, as well as a LAN port as well. Looking around the back, you'll see the fan located in the middle, as well as the integrated stand and the battery towards the bottom. Now, depending on which model you go for will depend if the battery is included as standard. If you do go for a battery model, it is a 7500 mAh 7.4 volt LiPo, and in my tests this will allow you to use the device on battery power for about 3 hours in standard use. As I also mentioned, integrated into the back is a stand, and this simply flips out to hold the device up at the perfect angle for viewing. Because this is a portable scope, it also has a built-in carry handle. This is pre-attached on the left hand side, and it allows you to pick up the scope quickly and easily without any problems at all. Taking a quick look at what else you get included with the kit, we obviously have the scope itself, and there's a PSU for either charging the battery or powering the scope when in use. This PSU is a Micsig branded 12 volt 4 amp hour model. Also included with the scope is a number of probes depending on which model you get. The model supplied on this was the P130As. These are ×10 probes, have a maximum bandwidth of 200 megs. With these you have all the usual accessories and all of the usual little ends, including color-coded pieces, and the probes themselves are the same as you would expect on pretty much any scope, with the usual hook end which pulls off to reveal the usual probe, and then you have your earth lead which is encapsulated with a rubber crocodile clip. Then at the base of the probe you have the BNC connector for connecting to the scope, which also has the adjustment built in for the ×10 function, which you can use with the 1 kHz oscillator located on the side of the scope itself. The next thing we're going to do now is take a look at the menu options and features of this scope. Now, because it is a smart-based device, it has some big benefits that you wouldn't have on a normal scope. So for instance, it has HDMI output, which means I'm going to be able to connect it into my computer and actually record the display and show you all of the menu options as we're walking through it. Another feature is it is touchscreen, which means not only can you use the controls on the side, but you can actually use the on-screen controls and use your finger to actually adjust things and interact with the scope in a way you're not used to doing on a traditional model. Now, there are several different models of these available. This is the 4-channel model, and it is the one with the increased memory depth, but they do have a whole range of these available depending on what your budget is as well. Anyway, let's get this thing fired up and let's get it connected and show you some of the capabilities of this scope. Now, to power it on, it's nice and straightforward. You simply press the power button in the bottom and wait for it to boot up. Now, what it will do when it first turns on is it will boot into the main home screen and then automatically boot straight into the scope. You can then jump back to the main home screen if you wanted to, where there are some other applications that we'll take a look at in a minute as well. But if you are looking to get it up and running quickly, it will just boot and go straight into the scope ready to be used. So as you can see, it's getting up and running now. So what I'm going to do is turn it around and actually plug it in to the HDMI so you guys can actually see what I'm seeing on the display. So I've got the scope hooked up via HDMI to my computer, and I'm actually recording the display so you can see what I'm actually seeing on the screen too. I've also got an overhead as well, which I'm going to use just to be able to show you some of the inputs as we're doing them. Now, as I mentioned, there are 2 ways to interact with this scope. We have the control inputs on the right hand side, but you also have the touch screen as well. So just to demonstrate that, for instance, on channel 1, if we wanted to move the position of it, we can use the position knob here. However, we can also simply touch the position and drag it up and down as well if we wanted to actually interact with it that way. The touch function is available on pretty much all of the menus. So if you didn't want to use the controls on the side, you can simply use your finger and touch what you're looking to actually set rather than fumble through with the control knobs and buttons. Now, just to go over what you're seeing on the main screen itself, at the moment we've got all 4 channels turned on. Channel 1, 2, 3, 4. Channel 1 is currently hooked up to our 1 kHz oscillator on the side. 2, 3 and 4 are simply floating. We've then got our channel options down here, which allow us to turn the channels on and off individually or adjust the settings for them as well. So for instance, if I press it, it selects the first time you press, the second press actually turns them off. If I turn channel 1 back on, you can see that we've got that 1 kHz oscillator being selected. If I wanted to actually adjust the settings for that channel, there are 2 ways of doing it. We can either press the menu button here, which brings the settings up, and press it again to close it, or you can actually tap on it on the option next to it and bring the options up. We can then use these control knobs at the top here to actually move through the settings, or again, we can simply use the touchscreen to select what we want. Under here, you will find all of the usual settings on a normal scope for the channels. So for instance, we've got our coupling settings, whether it be DC, AC or ground. We've got our probe selection, whether it be voltage, current, and our times setting. So for instance, if I click on the times 10, you can bring up all of the probe settings that you need. We can then either back out or press the back button to go back. We've got our bandwidth options, high pass, low pass filters, as well as our V-scale reference as well. You have these settings for each channel, so you can again select another channel, hit it, and you can bring it up for each individual channel as we go down as well. If we wanted to adjust the levels and position for channel 1, as I showed earlier, we can select channel 1, move it down, and then we can adjust the voltage scale. I'm just going to turn off channel 2 so you guys can see that a bit easier. And we can then simply adjust that until we get it in the position we want. If we then wanted to adjust our horizontal, we can simply do that here by turning the knob and again zooming out or zooming back in on our time base. You've then got the position adjustment here as well, just like on a normal scope, that allows you to adjust the position back and forth where we want it. Then on the right hand side here, we have our trigger options. Now this is all of the usual ones. So you've got your trigger level, you've got your force trigger, as well as your trigger menu options. And when you press that, it brings up a main menu at the top of the screen. Now I'll jump back into this in a minute because this menu is where pretty much all of the settings are for the scope itself. So for instance, if I press it again, it goes away. I press it, it comes on. To actually access that, you can also press this button up here, which is the top button, which brings it down, and that gives you all of the menu options available and doesn't jump straight to the trigger options. When you access it from the trigger button, it jumps straight to the trigger element of this screen. If we close that a moment, If we then look at up here, we've then got a bottom button, which brings up a bottom menu too, which has some various functions too, including screen capture. Now this takes a still capture of the screen. However, there is a really nice feature on this scope, and that is because it is Android based, you can actually do screen recording as well, rather than just still image capture, and I'll show you that a little bit more in a minute. We've got zoom options. We've got the all measure option, which brings up a box which shows us all of the information about the signal we're currently measuring. Bring that back up, turn that off. You've then got the serials option, as well as a menu that allows you to do other things, including the run, stop, and all of that stuff there too. We then, above this, have our measurement button, which allows us to jump into the measurement settings screen and select all of the individual measurement options. So for instance, on here, you have the option to select the channel that you want to measure. Now at the moment, it's only going to give us channel 1 because channel 1 is the only one turned on. And then you've got all of the standard measurement types down here. So duty width, width plus minus, you've got phase, peak to peak, all of the usual settings you would find on a scope. And again, if we push back, it pops out of that. Then moving around here, you've got a zoom button in the middle, which allows us to zoom in along the top of the display, again jumping into that signal a lot closer, so it's a quick way of getting in rather than just using the horizontal controls. Now, as I mentioned just now, this top button brings up this main menu with everything in. The individual function buttons will jump straight to that menu option for that function, but pressing the menu at the top will bring you into the main menu at the start. Now, if we walk through this and just have a look, the first screen is measure, which allows us to adjust all of the measurement settings like we've just seen. You've got the save screen, which allows us to save a screenshot, whether you want it local, disk, and what kind of image you want it to be saved as. Click back up to that. We've got our sample settings, so you can set it to normal, average, peak, etc. You've got your display options, so it allows you to change how the display will actually show on the screen. So for instance, you've got your common settings, your waveform settings, and your persist settings as well, all along the top there. We've then again got the trigger screen, which allows us to set the trigger options, so whether it be edge, pulse width, logic, n-edge, run to slope, etc. And then for instance, if we click on edge, it then allows us to set the source of the trigger and what kind of coupling you want for it as well. We've then got the auto set, which allows you to actually automatically detect input signals. It's an automatic rather than hitting the automatic button, and it's just another option with that. That's currently disabled. We've then got the frequency meter option, which allows us to turn that on. So for instance, if I turn it on channel 1 and back out, you will see that it is showing along the top up here, and that's the frequency meter. And again, if I click on that, go to disable, click back, you can see now that that has disappeared. Then you've got the user set along the end, which allows us just to set some of the other features such as memory depth, factory reset, adjust, save, or capture some stuff on the screen as well. So for instance, under capture, you've got timestamp, you've got inverse colors, etc. as well. So we've got that turned off at the moment. Now, along the bottom of the touchscreen, you also have some of the controls that replicate what you've got on the side here. So for instance, you've got your fine adjustment up and down to actually move it up and down on the display. You've got quick save, so you can tap that and it will take a screenshot of what you're seeing on the screen. We've got our zoom in and zoom out, so our time base. So again, we can adjust it down to 200 microseconds, 500. Or if you tap the button, it'll bring up the menu options and show you all of them, so you can simply jump in and, for instance, and hit 50, and it shows us like that. Or we can click 100, wait for it to actually read that in. Just take it down to 200 microseconds. You can see it there as well. You've then got your channel options down here, which is channel 1 is selected. We've then got cursor options as well, so we can turn cursors on and off on the display too, and we can adjust the position of these with the knobs at the top here. And then there's a little thing you can press here which brings up our other functions, such as our math functions, our reference, S1, S2, etc. So everything is laid out easy to find on the display. Now, if we do just quickly have a look at the math options, you can see I've turned it on and it's now showing the signal. If I click on it, you can see that we've got the options. So for instance, at the moment I've got channel 1 minus channel 2 because I was actually looking at some RS485 signals on the scope earlier, but we can actually say set it to +1 and channel 1 plus channel 1, which you can see now has doubled the signal level on the screen because it's basically adding up the same channel. Or I can halve it, so it's actually cut it down in half. We can times it, divide it, and do all of the usual math functions you would come to expect. You've got your reference mode. We can click back on. If I go into the decode options, you can see here you've got everything you would expect to find as well. So along the top, we've got our decode types for UART, CAN, SPI, I2C, etc. You've got your receive channel, your idle levels, your check, your odd, your even bits, as well as your baud rate and your display outputs as well. And again, you can access these with the math button, or you can access them directly with the ref button, depending on which one you want to use. And you can do it on screen too. And you can simply turn it off if you want to as well. Now that is the basic overview of the main features of the scope itself. However, that isn't everything because, as I've already mentioned, this is an Android-based device as well. Now to get to that side of things, you simply press the home button down here, give it a tap, and that'll return us back to the traditional Android home screen. Here you have the time and date located at the top. We then have the oscilloscope app, which just takes us straight back into the oscilloscope element of the device itself. Next to this, we've got an electrotool app, which I'll have a look at in a minute. It's really quite handy actually, and it allows you to actually do some calculations and stuff like that. We've got your settings, which is your traditional Android settings, and then we've got an app market option. Now this is a built-in app store for this device. Now there isn't a lot on here yet, but it is nice to see that they've integrated this so it allows you to actually download other apps to the device. Now there isn't Android Play Store on this as standard. It is customized, but that is an app store there available, so it does allow you to actually get stuff as they release it later in the future. Now, just returning back to the home, you can see, as I mentioned, we have this electrotool. Now, this is a really nice little thing. That's just a handy little app that allows you to do calculations, Ohm's law, and things like that. So rather than you having to actually dig your phone out, it's nice to actually have it directly on the device itself. So for instance, you've got a resistance voltage divider calculation, resistance calculator, coloring. So if you want to look up the colors on a resistance, RC filter, parallel resistance, voltage divider, and precise resistance. So it's just a nice little app that does give you some basic functionality and just helps you in your day-to-day workings when you're on the bench. Now, as I said, because it is Android, you do have all of the other usual stuff as well. So if we pull down from the top, we have our notifications, allows us to go into our settings, and you have all of the usual options for Android in here too. So for instance, you've got your Wi-Fi, your Ethernet, your display settings, your HDMI, your time, your date, all of that stuff that you would expect. There are also a few other apps installed as standard. When you swipe right, you'll find them on the second screen. Here you have things like the Test Keys app, which just tests the buttons on the device. You've got your calculator, your calendar, you've got your user guide built in as well, file manager, gallery, browser, and clock. So you've got all of the basics installed as standard. Now, one function that I mentioned earlier, which is really handy on this scope, is the ability to screen record. And it allows you to have some functionality you wouldn't be used to having on an oscilloscope, but it also allows you to do some things you wouldn't normally be able to do, or you wouldn't be able to do without, say, recording with the camera. So, for instance, if you wanted to record what you're actually looking at, you can simply swipe down from the top, bring the notifications bar up, and you can see here we've got a screenshot option and a record screen option. So to do this, we simply hit the record screen button. You can see it counts down and a little timer appears in the top corner. We can then return into the oscilloscope screen, and here it is recording everything that we're seeing on the display. Now this is really nice if you're someone like me who's making content and you want to be able to share what you're seeing out, or if you want to be able to look back on something at a later date or share it with work colleagues as well. Now you can see it's showing up, so what we're going to do is just do some adjustments. We'll adjust the position of the signal as well, and then when we're finished with the screen recording, we can then simply tap the time at the top, and that will actually stop the recording and save it to the device. Now to access this and play it back, you simply go to the home, swipe across, go under the gallery, and under here you've got your screenshots option as well as your record screen options. So if we click on the record screen, hit play on that one, and you can see this is the actual recording we made just now, and it's then going to play back what we actually did and show you the signal that we were seeing on the screen, and actually show you all of the changes and adjustments that we made. So it is really handy feature to have in the scope. And as I said earlier, this model has 8 gig of storage built in, which is really handy. So you've got plenty of space in there to be able to store them, but you can then switch them out onto a USB drive if you wanted to do that as well. Now overall, that is the main basic functionality of the scope. I haven't gone too depth into every single menu setting. Everything is here that you would expect to find on a standard lower cost scope. Now price wise, these do come in varying models, but they are not at the high end of the price range, and this model I've got here is under £600 in the UK. What we will do though at the end is just take a look at some of the other models that are available too, just to give you an idea of some of the ones that are in the range. Now using this scope in the real world is pretty much the same as any scope. It features an auto button like you'd find on most scopes these days, and that will automatically configure your inputs for you when you are measuring a signal. So for instance, we're looking here at a Beck, which is a regulator, and we're going on to the switching regulator before the inductor, and we're simply going to then click auto, and it will then configure the input to display the waveform correctly on the screen. Now obviously, depending on the kind of signal you are reading, it might not always get it 100%, but you can see here that it has configured it nicely. Then we can have a look at the time base and scroll out, and you can see the waveform there, or we can go in closer and take a closer look at it. Now on this side, we've got our auto, run, stop, single options, as well as a screen capture as well. So for instance, if we wanted to go to single, zoom in and have a look a lot closer, and if we wanted to take a screen grab of that, we can simply press the screen capture button and it will take a screenshot. Or you've also got the quick save button down here, which will do exactly the same thing with the waveform. We can then zoom out, and we can even turn on other functions which are associated with the shift key. So for instance, if we press shift, we can turn on our markers. That allows us to actually adjust the positions of these, and we can even turn on the vertical ones as well. So again, we can set our markers on the various parts of the waveform depending on what we want it to do. So if I do that one, we can then bring it over, and we could actually have a look at what the duty cycle is on that as well if we wanted to do it. Another feature that I haven't mentioned yet is the ability to turn off the touchscreen on the tablet as well. So if we put it on to run, you've got the shift button down here, and if you press shift and home, you'll see a padlock appear in the top corner, and this will actually disable the touch input, meaning that you can't accidentally change anything. Something else you can do with the touch input as well, and something I didn't mention, is adjust the trigger via the touchscreen as well. So for instance, if we just turn off both of them, if we go into our trigger settings, and we're currently on channel 2 and edge, which is all fine, and then we can actually just tap this level here and use our finger to drag the trigger up and down rather than actually use the knob. So for instance, if I leave the trigger there, hit run, you'll see now that the signal is actually moving and it is not grabbing it still with the trigger. And then if I just drag the trigger down, you can see that it will hold it in place as well. Now, whilst these scopes are designed to be portable, they do work very well on the bench as well, and they actually have a couple of benefits over a traditional scope. For instance, because this one is now on battery, I'm isolated from the mains earth, and that does bring some benefits when you're working on certain type of equipment. For instance, if you are working on switch mode power supplies, you usually would need to use a differential probe. However, because this device is isolated, you wouldn't have to worry about that earthing element. However, it is always worth taking into account that when you are working on switch modes, there are very high voltages involved and you do need to be careful. For me, I tend to use a scope for a mixture of things, including switch mode power supply repair, electronics repair like I've got here, or devices out and about. And this week I've had this connected up on my solar PV system when I was setting up the remote monitoring, tested my broadband with it, and I also brought it into the car to check the CAN bus lines were working correctly when I was having some problems with the scanner. As I did mention, I have also used the scope to check my broadband because I have VDSL that has been giving me some issues. And as you can see, we're using the built-in FFT function just to see how things are looking. And on the screen, you can see that we have it showing up on the top and the bottom with the 2 probe inputs, as well as the FFT function showing it in the center, showing us the carriers. So what do I think of this scope from Micsig? Well, actually, I really like it. It is really one of the easiest scopes to use that I've had in a long time, and the fact that it is portable just makes life so much easier. It is available in multiple models with or without the battery, and when you do have it with the battery, it's just nice to be able to have the freedom of not being tethered to the desk with a mains cable. The fact that you can simply pick it up and go and do what you need to do without worrying is really handy. Now, you might be someone who's a hobby user and just looking for a scope to be able to use out and about, or you might be a pro that needs a scope for everyday use. This should cover most people's basic needs. Now, there are some really interesting extra features on these models as well, around the fact that it's Android based and you have those functionality like having the screen recording, you have the USB and HDMI options too, and it's just nice to have something that's a bit smarter than you find on the traditional basic scope. Now, when I said earlier about this being the battery model, it does allow us to also do some other things as well. And because it isn't connected to mains or earth, you can do some additional things like I showed earlier with regards to working on power supplies. So for instance, you don't necessarily need a differential probe when working on switch mode supplies. Now, it is always advised because the differential probe has a much higher voltage rating, but if you do know what you're doing, you can work on power supplies with this one because it's not referenced to mains earth, so you don't have to worry about that side of things. Now, this scope, as I said a few times, is available in multiple models. You can get it in 2-channel, 4-channel, and the overall specification can change depending on what model you get. It is available from Telonic Instruments in the UK, and I think this one here is around £500, or you can get it through Micsig themselves for between $600 and $1,000, depending on which model you choose. Overall, I have to say, if you are looking to get yourself a portable scope, this is the best one that I've personally used in a long time, and it does everything I need a scope to do. And as I've said, from a person who does things like upload content online, doing work out and about, it literally ticks close to every box. Now, I would like to thank Micsig for sending this one over to me. I wouldn't have been able to make this video without their support. Really nice bit of kit, really impressed, and I'm looking forward to actually seeing what else I can use it for in the next couple of weeks as well. Now, finally, I'd just like to say, if you've liked what you've seen in this video, please do consider subscribing to the channel. There is also a button next to it as well, which you can click, which is the bell, and that way you'll get updates on any videos that we release in the future. If you'd like to support the channel, there is also links to buy me a coffee as well as Patreon in the description too, and it is only with you guys' support are we able to keep making videos like this.